Personally, I have a terrible fear of spiders, and this in fact extends to daddy longlegs. If one happens to come in on a winter's night, I have no hesitation of chucking it out the door for it to be owl food. Imagine my surprise when searching through the photographs that the National Railway Museum holds. I came across a photo of the daddy longlegs engine. Naturally, I was intrigued and a little confused. Despite it resembling a pier or some weird boat, this is in fact a railway engine. It was named Pioneer and was the brainchild of a man called Magnus Volk. Originally born in Brighton in 1869, Volk was the son of a German clockmaker. He had a brilliant mind and had become an apprentice to a company that made scientific instruments. He was obsessed with technology, in particular electricity, and became the first person in Brighton to use electric lighting within his own home. He was so ambitious and so excited about this new type of power that he was offered a contract to light Brighton's Royal Pavilion for the very first time with incandescent lighting. From his lucrative contracts, Volk was able to procure funds to draft up a plan for the UK's first ever electric railway. It wasn't the first time electricity had been considered as a power source on railway lines. In 1837, Robert Davidson from Aberdeen had created an engine that ran on batteries. However, it could only haul 6 tons at 4 miles an hour and at a distance of 1.5 miles before needing to be recharged. And although it was tested on the Glasgow and Edinburgh line, it was ultimately destroyed by disgruntled railway workers who saw it as a threat to their jobs. The first railway that ran on electricity that was able to haul passengers was created in Berlin in 1879. It was so unique as it used a specialist third rail that was electrified. This meant that the engine could pick up the power anywhere along its 300-metre long circular track via its contact roller under the engine. Unlike batteries that needed to be recharged, this engine could run indefinitely and was very successful. Even today, many companies still use the third rail to power their engines. There is no doubt that Volk must have been inspired by this, and on the 4th of August of 1883, Volks unveiled his first line. It was only a quarter of a mile long, and it was a 2-foot gauge line extended from the seashore to the aquarium on Chain Pier. The power came from a 50-volt DC generator, which was attached to the power car. This gave the engine a top speed of around 6 miles an hour. Volks was pleased with his success and straight away went back to the drawing board to extend the line westwards. However, for the first time in his career, Volks was turned down by the council. So, undeterred, he put in plans to go the other way. He proposed new lines from the aquarium to Banjo-Goyne, widened the track to just over narrow gauge and produced newer power cars. The council approved of this plan, and soon the line was extended to over 1,400 yards, with a new station and a new loop, so cars can run and pass simultaneously. This allowed a service every 5 minutes. In 1892, with the railway working comfortably, Volk set his sight towards Rottingdean. This would be his most ambitious plan yet, as it would be a 3-mile track, but he had a problem. Unlike his previous railway, where it was lovely and flat, the two towns were separated by a very steep gradient. Volks was presented with 2 options. He could either create a railway that would run along the cliff tops, but he was worried that his engines may not have the power to get up that gradient, or build a viaduct alongside the undercliff. This would have been not only costly, but would have had to be built on very unstable, sea-battered foundations. Neither idea excited him, so he decided on a third option. Volk created 2 separate narrow-gauge tracks that were cemented to the seashore. These tracks were set 18 foot apart and were supported by massive concrete blocks, which were set into the chalk bedrock. The power for this incredible machine would be supplied by an overhead cable which was supported by clip bolts that stood on poles 21 feet above the ground. The engine itself was built by the Gloucester and Carriage Railway Works and Wagon Company. They called it a saltwater tram and named it Pioneer. It weighed about 45 tons and was consisted of a deck 45 foot long and 22 feet wide. The deck was supported by 4 legs, each 23 feet long. Each leg had a bogie carrying 4 wheels, which were 33 inches in diameter. The 2 bogies, one on either side, provided the power, while the other 2 provided the brakes. In the centre of the deck there was a saloon, and passengers could climb the stairs to the promenade deck, situated on the saloon's roof. On the 27th of November, Pioneer took its first maiden trip, and it went incredibly well. But less than a week later, a massive storm hit the region. Pioneer broke from her moorings and was found the next day, lying on her side, almost beyond repair. Mormon Gold of Millwall recovered the remains of Pioneer, and after a tremendous effort to rebuild her with 2 new legs that were 2 foot longer than the original, it was amazing that both Pioneer and the railway opened on the July 20th of 1897. Pioneer didn't have any accidents after this and was quite successful. She was a novelty and allowed people to travel even if the tide was in. Pioneer wasn't without her faults, however. Due to the small motors and the pressure of the tides when the tide was in, she could only go at walking pace, and the storm's recovery meant that funds were very tight. In 1900, funds became massively tighter when an unexpected consequence of new erosion defences caused damage to the trackbed. Volks had to close the line for several weeks during the busy season while repairs were undertaken. In the following November, Volks ordered to move the line for more new sea defences were planned, and this would have meant the line had to go into much deeper water, which Volks could ill afford. Unfortunately for the electric railway, an 1893 Act gave the company involved creating the sea defences sweeping powers to remove anything that gets in the way, and this included part of Pioneer's line. You may remember in an earlier video that I mentioned it is a legal requirement that a railway has to provide affordable transport. Now, due to the railway closing, due to no fault of their own, Parliament had to create what was called the Abandonment Act, which allowed for the abandonment of the sea line and the implementation of the original viaduct idea. Fundraising began, but after 5 years the plan was abandoned after failing to raise the money required. 8 years after the line closed, Pioneer had been attached to her Ovington pier, quietly rusting away. Eventually the tracks were removed and sold for scrap. The engine was dismantled, parts of it were sent to Germany. There is no evidence that any part of Pioneer survived, and it was most likely melted down due to the increasing need for metal in the preparation for the upcoming war. Other than photos and a single video, the only evidence of the railway's presence are the 2 lines of concrete that once held the metal rails. Time has done little to diminish them and can be seen at low tide. Volks' legacy, however, lives on in the oldest working electric railway that is still operational today. But if you are on the shoreline at low tide, you can walk the same route of the 18-foot gauge Daddy Longlegs, the weird and wonderful electric pier engine.